Welcome to the Phoenix Conversations. Second chances, fresh starts, and powerful new chapters. I'm Lucy McCarraher, author, speaker, publisher, and entrepreneur. And each week I talk to men and women who've lived through turning points and come out brighter on the other side. Whether this is the first time you've listened to this podcast or you're a regular listener, if you haven't already, I would really appreciate it if you'd hit follow and subscribe. Today, I'm talking to Kevin Mark Watts, a business coach and author who has a bespoke management program called the 10-10-Minute Rules and a book of the same name. The name might give you a connection with sport, which has woven in and out of his life from school to Premier League and Championship football and working with Simon Jordan at Crystal Palace Football Club. But his career has taken in many other aspects too, all of which, I point out, were never mistakes, but feed into the journey and where it's taken Kevin now. Well, hello, Kevin, and thank you so much for joining me on the Phoenix Conversations.
Honestly, it's all my pleasure to be here, Lucy. I feel very honoured.
Thank you. That's very kind. So, Kevin, you've had a very interesting and quite a lot of reinventions in your life. But I'll start at the beginning. What was childhood like for you? What were you like as a child, and what were the kind of influences on you at the beginning?
I was a bit rebellious, if I'm honest, in terms of education, and that kind of came about because I was just mad about football. I loved football. Tottenham Hotspurs of the 1970s. I'm showing my age now. Were Pat Jennings, the goalkeeper, was my idol, and my mum embroidering the badge, the Hotspur badge on a green T-shirt that we bought in the market because we didn't have a lot of money, and it was just my life. And one Christmas day, they bought me a simple leather football as a Christmas present. It was probably one of the most profound presents, just the smell of the real leather. And I was the kid going down the park playing football with my friends every evening. Unfortunately, because of that, my academic studies started to perhaps wane. I had to go on sort of special measures. It was just additional homework sessions with my mum. But the real turning point for me was, unfortunately, I had a bit of a bad experience with my PE coach. I was the first team goalkeeper of the school team. I was only 10 years of age, and he'd been screaming mild profanities at me through the match. And obviously I wasn't doing something right for him. It got to the end of the match. We'd lost quite badly. And he asked me what the time was. And me being a flippant 10-year-old boy mistakenly said to him, "Oh, sir, have you not got your watch on you today?" To which he took offence, looked down at me and shouted, "If you talk to me like that again, you'll regret it." And then about a week later, I found out he dropped me from the team and I never played for the school again. So it really hit my confidence, and I had middle child syndrome. So I had an elder brother who'd already passed his 11 plus and gone to grammar school. I was coming into my 11th year, and suddenly this, what I now know is imposter syndrome, was just enveloping me. I just felt such an underachiever in many ways, obviously with my academic studies being a struggle, getting dropped from the team. And that's where the journey started, really. And when I did go to secondary school, I dealt with that by being rebellious, by being a bit naughty, not horrendous, but just a bit cheeky, a bit too flippant. I used to make wisecracks to curry favour with my friends, and it was that kind of situation. I dreaded my parents going to open evenings. I sort of worked my way through secondary school. I decided I would try and reboot the whole thing and go to a technology college as opposed to staying on in sixth form. And that was another huge mistake for me because I had to make a whole new batch of friends. I didn't have a lot of confidence. I wasn't an outgoing person. And then one particular mate, I just thought, I've had enough of this. I'd done pretty much the first academic year at the college. I was studying sociology and statistics. I thought I was going to be a journalist. And I thought, I just can't do this anymore. So I just walked down to the job centre at lunchtime. And in those days, a job centre, you'd sit there with a card that you picked up off the wall, and the lady would phone the person giving the job out and say, "I've got somebody here for an interview." And I went straight up to this high-class menswear retailer, and I got the job, and I absolutely loved it. Just having those soft skills, having those interactions with people coming into the store and being able to sell them suits, shirts, ties, shoes to go with it, sometimes even the overcoat. it was like I'd been reborn. I'd suddenly found these soft skills that completely fitted in with where I am as a person. It just dawned on me that the entrepreneurial or business life was for me, sales was for me, not selling in hard selling, but just that lovely human interaction.
Interesting. Sorry, yeah, that's a really interesting story because I can I can read kind of a pattern in there that obviously we've all kind of seen before, but I can completely understand how early on not being academic was balanced by being very good at football. And then suddenly you lost that as well. So you kind of lost all your self belief. Everything you thought you were good at had gone. And I think that often happens that in secondary school where the work gets harder, you do actually have to be more academic about things. And if you don't do it, then playing the cheeky chappy, being the joker, disrupting the class, annoying the teacher becomes a pattern and you can't get out of it. But you say you made a mistake when you went to college, but actually, was it a mistake, really? Because look where it led.
Well, yes, who knows what would have happened if I'd have stayed currying favour with my friends, because you're right to say that. The reassurance that my friends would laugh if I was being cheeky was giving me the confidence that I needed to build back up again. But it's not the right sort of confidence, is it? But you are right. I felt all the way through my journey that there's this sort of spiritual connection with why do we do certain things at certain times? And there's a number of occasions in my life where those sorts of situations seem to have happened, and then something more beneficial has come out of it. So yeah, you're probably right. It probably wasn't a mistake.
I tend to feel that nothing's wasted. You do stuff as it comes, and it's not the thing you want to be doing, but actually it all filters in at some point. It's all learning and it's all useful. So tell me more about your amazing career in retail, because it's wonderful that you found that love and that ability, which has nothing to do with sport, but just to do with people and selling.
Yes, that's right. And it was crazy because I was very successful. I left there and I joined another retail company as an assistant manager. And I think by about the age of 23, I was actually running the largest menswear fashion store in the Luton Arndale Centre. Independent, I should say, the largest two-floor fashion store, which frightened me to death at the time, given my age, but I fought through that. Then I kind of reached a ceiling with clothing. I could see that there was a wider bandwidth for development and education in retail. So I took a step back and I started running much smaller convenience stores for a multi-site retailer that had 700 stores, one of the largest of its time in the UK. And it was a really good experience for me because they were much more systemized. They knew how to get a store in the far reaches of Inverness and another store down in Land's End operating in the same spectrum. And I really enjoyed it. And again, became a very successful store manager. After 2 years, I became an area manager. And then the imposter syndrome, Lucy, kicked in again here at this point. When you're running a store, everything's at arm's reach. Your staff, your systems, your product, it's all within arm's reach. And when you go into area field sales, you're now managing a network of 20 people across, and it was in central London, which was a very challenging area. And I really couldn't build any relationships with any of the store managers. In fact, because I had imposter syndrome at the start before we even got going, I always felt like I was invading their little emporium. Me going in was taking away a little bit of their authority with the team, and it made me feel it stopped me managing people properly and managing situations properly. And I did a pretty bad job of it. So much so that when there was a reshuffle, my position got taken away from me for somebody far more experienced, and I was left floating around as a spare body. My boss, he sent me off to Bristol, and all he asked me to do was to sort out this one store. Now, when I walked into that store, that branch manageress probably had the worst case of and yeah, I got made redundant. So it all came collapsing down at a moment's notice. And then I'm sat there thinking, oh, okay, now what?
How did you deal with that personally? Were you kind of really knocked back, or did you feel pretty quickly that, okay, this is an opportunity rather than a problem?
So nobody likes that initial feeling of rejection. And you obviously feel that initial emotion of disconnection, of rejection. But at the end of the day, I was fortunate that I had 6 months notice to get my head around that. So I had plenty of time to start looking at options. There was a lovely lady who ran a recruitment agency that I actually used to use at the company. So I got hold of her and she started lining me up with various interviews and things like that. And it started to feel like at least I was doing something about it. And then she phoned me up one particular day and she said, right, I've got this business. He's a very young boss. He's 32 years of age. He drives a red Ferrari. He's got a mobile phone business in Slough. So first of all, I went to see the marketing director. He was blown away with my multi-site experience. They were a new multi-site company then. They had about 600 stores and they were struggling with that disconnect between the head office and the stores, which is quite a common scenario. He was blown away with some of the stuff that I'd had the experience of. And certainly as well as I was going as a HR manager. And I think my USP as a HR manager was that I wasn't academically trained. I was coming from the shop floor. I'd done the job. I'd done the area job. And when area managers would phone me, I'd lived and breathed exactly the world they were talking about. So I could give them very real practical advice. And the second interview was to go and see the boss of the firm, whose name was Simon Jordan, who's now quite a famous entrepreneur, talks on TalkSport radio for a living at the moment every morning. And I went for that first interview with him and I said to my recruitment lady, I said, what do you think I should do? She said, take a PowerPoint. Now, in those days, it wasn't electronic. It was a little flip chart thing that you would flip over. She said, take a PowerPoint. So I opened up the thing and I started going through these slides. So if you picture the scene, I'm sat here. The sales director is sat to my left and Simon is sat across the desk at his desk in his big boss's chair. And his phone rang and he picked it up mid-sentence of me and walked off and took the call. So I looked to my left to the sales director and went, what do I do now, Martin? And he said, keep going. So I find myself presenting to an empty chair. I came out of that interview and I phoned up the recruitment lady and I said, there's no way on God's earth I've got that job. So you can forget about that. She says, oh dear, did it not go well? I said, no, I told her the story. She said, oh, I'm so sorry to hear that, she said. And then the following morning, she called me. She said, you're not going to believe this. He wants you to come back for a final interview. So, of course, I couldn't really fathom what was going on. I went into Simon's office with Martin to my left again, and I sat across the desk. And he looked at me and he went, I'll be honest with you, I was not impressed at all with your interview all the way through. I thought it was a very staple approach, a lot of very basic statements flying around, not much content or creation. But he said, you know what, you said something at the end of the interview that lit a spark in me. So let's pick up where we left off. Now, the problem with that, Lucy, was I couldn't remember what I'd said at the end of the interview. So anyway, we picked it up from there and yeah, I got the job. So I worked for Simon and his mobile phone business as their HR manager for 7 months. But Simon is a real hard visionary. One of these people in life that has been very successful, but has also had a tremendous amount of adversity because he's a big risk taker. And he was a hard man to sort of get on board in terms of, the way I wanted to do the job and impress him. And it took me a while. And actually, I started running into some deep water about 6 months into the role. Well, his PA called me, said, your company car's arrived. I said, okay, I'll pick the keys up. I'll drive it home when I leave tonight. And then Simon comes down, comes into the office and says, have you seen your car yet? It was almost like he was giving me a personal gift. We sat in the car and he told me he was going to buy Crystal Palace Football Club and he was selling the mobile phone business. And he asked me if I'd go with him. And that's kind of where that journey started. So long story short, I went from being made redundant and sort of finding myself in this abyss of what am I going to do next, to suddenly one lovely Monday morning, and it was one of those lovely, hot, sunny July days, I found myself standing at the side of this beautiful football pitch and thinking, goodness me, how on earth have I got myself here? And well, my love for football suddenly it went full circle. It came back and,
That's
I got to live this
isn't it?
wonderful 10 years in the world of football, albeit in commercial management.
It's fantastic, isn't it, how things seem to, reinventions take you to places and you often do get back to that first love. I've noticed for a lot of people that, there's something maybe in their childhood or their early life they really really wanted to do, and life kind of takes them on all sorts of little diversions, and then suddenly it brings them home. So eventually, Kevin, you moved out of that. You had about 10 years in the football industry, and then you set up a community sports education business. So tell me about that.
Simon bought the club out of administration. So that was a really challenging time for me. I found my HR skills coming to the fore there because we had a lot of people that were very backward looking, protecting their base, as you would do, wouldn't you? If you're working for a business that's on the verge of going bust. So dealing with their mindset for those first 2 years was a really challenging role. And also getting people on board with Simon's unique way of sort of being at the helm of the business, and it's not everybody's cup of tea, and there has to be a little bit of churn, but my job was to get as many people, certainly the main stakeholders, on board with that and build that lovely sort of community within the club. We got promoted for one season in the Premier League. Unfortunately, we didn't survive that and we came straight back down, and then we were constantly chasing that dream again. And then the property crash happened, and a lot of Simon's equity was tied up in Spanish property. And Spain was probably the worst hit in that property recession, if you remember, from 2007 onward. So we were really, really cash strapped. And unfortunately, there was a little bit of espionage within the club. Somebody who was on our board who had been with the club previously before I went in with Simon and his brother Dominic. He started leaking stuff out to a particular customer of his on the corporate marketing side. And we ended up getting put back into administration through this move that was going on behind the scenes politically, which was a real shame. Simon lost a fair bit of money in that, and I came out of that really quite low, if I'm honest with you, because I'd spent 6 months telling people who trusted us that everything was going to be okay. We would get through this. We knew what our plan was to come out of this difficult situation. It was all about going into the January transfer market and selling a couple of key players for a significant sum, which we never had the opportunity to do. And the day that we went into administration, I was having to take calls from people that had completely trusted in me in terms of people we owed money to, and having to say, look, I'm really sorry. And it was a very difficult time. I left the club feeling very, very low and very lacking confidence in myself again. I was really struggling to have an identity now because football is quite a unique proposition. I'd kind of lost a little bit of my retail identity, having been there for 10 years. And that was reaffirmed as I went into London to look at some recruitment agencies and sat in front of these people, and they were saying, what do you want to do? And I said, well, I'd really love to get back into a decent HR post. And they were saying, you can't do that now because you've been out of it for too long, but we'll give you this marketing role at a cricket club or a rugby club. And I thought, I don't feel that's me. So completely lost in the October, I just went up to Birmingham, started walking around the National Franchise Show. I didn't know what I was looking for. And I bumped into a guy called Eddie Ray, who runs a company called Progressive Sports in the Midlands. He had a successful run himself, and it was a community sport business. So it was built on the premise of taking sports professionals into primary schools to deliver their physical education lessons. Now, I'd actually seen this at Crystal Palace Football Club, but I wasn't that impressed with it. It's done a lot better now in the football industry, but back in those days, it was always seen as a sort of second string. The people that worked in those environments kind of really wanted to work in professional football, but couldn't, so they took this. But what Eddie showed me was remarkable in terms of the quality, the planning, the lesson planning, and everything that went with it. And I thought, wow, this is really something that could make a difference. And I liked the fact that it was a community-based business where I could make a difference to my local community. So I shook hands with Eddie and I set up his first major franchise model in Southeast London and Kent, Greenwich, Bromley, Bexley, and then going down into Dartford and a little bit of Medway. And it was a wonderful time. It really was. Absolutely going in, talking to head teachers, going into talking to heads of PE, representing myself as a local person in the community, looking to make things better in their schools. And it works really well in the primary school sector because a lot of them can't afford full-time PE teachers these days. So if they have somebody coming in from our business for 1 or 2 days a week, it fits their model. And it means we can really build a very strong community business that is completely enhancing the betterment of children's well-being, tackling obesity issues in children and all those things, too much time with tablets and stuff. And in the term time, we would run PE and education before and after school clubs. And in the holiday time, we'd have some great fun running holiday camps. So offering a childcare facility as well. And it was wonderful. I had a very successful first 18 months. We'd actually generated about £250,000 worth of turnover in about 9 months. So I made an application for the South London Business Awards. We went down there and we picked up the award. And it was the most wonderful feeling, not just for me, Lucy, but for everybody in the team who'd contributed and believed in my vision. I found for the very first time the power of what you can do with a small group of people when they all buy in to the same vision as you. And yeah, it was just absolutely wonderful. And then there were two things that followed. About 7 days after picking up the award, all the staff were down the pub waiting for me. There were end of year drinks and post sort of award celebrations. And I'm sat in the office on my own with my head in my hands thinking, we're going to run out of money, because 8 of those schools had walked away. I had 3 people on the payroll I couldn't afford. I'd already invested in their wages to do the marketing in the first place. And it was either I was going to have to take some more of my own personal cash to keep us and survive, or we were just going to have to fold up. And I thought, my goodness me, this is horrendous. And yeah, I had to go and spend the evening with the team, knowing on the Monday two of those people were going to be getting made redundant.
So how did that take you into your latest iteration of what you do now?
Yeah, so a guy that I work very closely with, he had a horrendous accident, was in a induced coma actually for 6 months. And when he came out that, he went through a neurological rehabilitation. And again, it sort of re-emphasized to me the power of, if you like, how we can relearn these skills. And they were effectively reconnecting some of the stuff I thought he'd lost in his former knowledge and intellectual capital in the accident and his brain damage. And they were reconnecting the neurons to create new pathways to get that working again. It was a miracle to see him coming back to us and working again. And it inspired me to think, yeah, this is really the way forward. And that connected with what I'd learned at the school and what Prozone were doing in the world of football. So yeah, I started to create what I now call the 10 pillar program, which is effectively using this self-analysis process across the 10 pillars of business. So I break down business into 10 functions. That's how businesses operate. And then look at departments within the business to analyze within themselves what best practice looks like, share that with them so they create that for themselves, so they're completely on board. And then do this analysis process of, okay, so of those 10 best practice statements, for example, what works? What do I already do very well? What are the things that I could probably do with delegating at some point, because it's just not my natural skill? And what are the things that I need to personally develop and work on, and then start building in some routines to improve that, to get that alignment within the department, within the business, and so on. I eventually sold my business back to Eddie Ray in 2022, thought I was going to retire. And Eddie said, oh, will you just do this for me? And will you just go and see this company? And will you do a bit of coaching over here and a bit of coaching over there? And I went, oh, okay, just 2 days a week though, Eddie, no more. But I really enjoyed it, Lucy. And I suddenly realized that I might have something here. I was starting to sort of construct the 10 pillar program as a formal training model. And my wife actually said to me, why don't you write a book? So I'm now in your lane completely. And I'm going, a book? How's that going to work? And that's what I did. So I wrote the 10-minute rules as an introduction to what I call this process for team acculturation in businesses.
I'm sure becoming an author, as I always tend to say, is another little reinvention of its own. And I'm sure put you in the expert role, having your book out there, and that's your business now, I guess.
Well, yes. So, the book was published in December last year. I'm very fortunate that it got shortlisted into an organisation that you founded, which is the Business Book Awards, which is a wonderful event. I went last September and had a thoroughly enjoyable evening with my publisher. I've got your book magic on my bookshelf, which was a lovely complimentary gift on the night. And I feel very honoured that I've managed to get into the shortlist for people, culture and management on that. But ultimately, it's also about now turning that into a commercial prospect.
That's a brilliant outcome and such a Such a story with such variety in it. I mean, so many ups and downs, Kevin. It's been really fascinating to hear all your different reinventions. And, I love the fact that football and children have run through your story and kind of united it.
Thank you.
And thank you so much, Kevin, for sharing your Phoenix conversations, your reinventions, and your amazing life here with us. Thank you.
Again, thanks for having me.
Thank you, Kevin Mark Watts, for sharing your reinventions, the ups and downs, and surprising places that life has taken you. Congratulations on writing your book, even though you didn't feel you succeeded academically, and for it being shortlisted in the Business Book Awards. For more inspiring reinvention stories, follow and subscribe now to the Phoenix Conversations on Spotify, Apple, or YouTube, or maybe all three. You can connect with me on most social media platforms as long as you can spell my name. I am the only Lucy McCarraher on the internet, and I'd love to hear your reinvention story. I look forward to seeing you on the next episode.